Hey everyone, I'm Kyle,
I'm Jason.
and we're here to talk to you today about Between the Buried and Me's newish album, Colors 2.
Yeah, so Colors 2 came out in August of 2021. Honestly, I will say, and I'm curious to hear what your opinion is, that is a swing for the fences if I've ever heard one. I know that going to 2021, early in 2021, hearing that, oh, hey, Between the Buried and Me, kind of the eminent progressive metal band, right, of our era, or has become the eminent progressive metal band of our era, not only is releasing a new record, which I think is cause enough for some excitement and kind of rile up the community, but then to call it Colors 2,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll get to here shortly. Just as far as a legacy goes, that's quite a legacy. So I know that was my initial impression in hearing that was in fact the title of the next Between the Buried and Me record. What did you think?
I thought this record was performed immaculately. I thought the production was stellar. I thought the songwriting was inspired. And I can't remember one fucking thing that happens on the album after listening to it 3 times. it's, no, I mean, it's a great album. And I guess we'll get into this more in depth later. Or maybe, you know what, fuck it, maybe now is the best time. I feel like this album is kind of a punctuation to the style that Between the Buried and Me has developed. And it's not often that you find a band that has been doing this type of music for as long as they have that still have kind of a core sound while going through the changes that they've gone through. Obviously, they've done more rocky records. I think you would consider Coma Eclectic a more rocky record. There's still a lot of metal elements on there, but they've done other things. But at their core, they've always been BTBAM, and this is, I think, one of the most, if not the most BTBAM sounding records, and I loved it. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but it was it was dense almost to a fault at times. Like I'm listening to it, and then the song would end, and I'd be like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, I think that's a good term, and obviously kind of get to it and more in depth as we kind of go through our thoughts. But dense is kind of the operative term here. I think it definitely, when you're speaking of Between the Buried and Me and just speaking of their music, and this goes all the way back to the very first record, right? They kind of deal in that density. They make no apologies for writing these 80-minute long records, and
Mm-hmm.
it seems like that's kind of their modus operandi here. With that being said, though, I think to me, one of the things I appreciate about Between the Buried and Me and their place kind of in the modern progressive metal scene is that whereas a lot of other bands that maybe at one, and this might be a controversial opinion, but a lot of other bands that maybe at one point held that torch,
Mm-hmm.
I look kind of specifically in the direction of like a Leprous or like a Haken. They kind of went more in that modern, genty kind of, a little bit different direction than I guess a band that would be trying to pursue the coattails of like a Dream Theater or maybe some of those 90s or even late 80s progressive rock kind of titans,
Mm-hmm.
To Between the Buried and Me's credit, I would say I think that they probably have come closest into the realm of capturing a lot of those vibes as they've kind of progressed and as they've matured. That's another thing I kind of will touch on. But yeah, really interesting to watch the progression specifically through the last three records. I think culminating, as you said, kind of an exclamation point with Colors 2.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll kind of dive into that. But that's kind of the overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. I would posit you this question, and I touched a little bit on, I guess, my thoughts on it, but what would you say, in your view, is Between the Buried and Me's? I'm just gonna say BT BAM for the rest of the video.
Let's do that.
BT BAM's place in the progressive music scene. Um, you know, 15 years ago versus today. Where do you kind of see their progression and where they sit in that scene?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, they were. Let me think. What year is this? 2022. So 15 years ago, Colors, the original Colors, comes out. I still remember going to my dorm at Indiana State and watching the video streams that they did for each of the music videos for the songs. And I think coming out of that, and everybody brings up Colors as like the best BT album, the best BTBAM album, which I mean I'd probably agree that it is on the whole probably the most well-rounded album. Um, but thinking about where they were at going into it, they were coming out of Alaska, which I think is a great album that now being 17 years removed from its release, I honestly don't feel like enough people talk about how awesome that album is, and how they really were kind of this. I shudder to use the phrase metalcore, but they're very much hardcore metalcore with progressive elements type of band in it. You had Mordecai and Chevanel and Destructo Spin and all those really cool, unique songs on the first couple records, and then Alaska, I feel like is the first album, and probably has something to do with the first album that Blake and Dusty are on. I feel like that's the first album where it's like, okay, here's the sound, and this is what it's going to be. And fortunately for everybody involved, they have had the same personnel for the last 17 years. They've had a more or less consistent sound while still being adventurous. So I feel like, anyways, without getting too off topic, I feel like Colors, for me, Alaska, but Colors for most people really cemented them in the prog rock zeitgeist. I know I used that word last episode, so don't fucking roast me for using it wrong again. But versus now, like, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Like, I know I still have the same bands from 17 years ago where I'll listen to them, and there's been new ones that I've picked up, but I don't know what the Gen Zers or maybe people who have gotten into BTBAM after the fact really think about them. I mean, is this so far removed for them from, maybe if you came from a more of a gent periphery type background, like, is this out there? Like, I really don't know what people think of BTBAM if they're just getting into them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting to me, and it's kind of interesting too, you going back and kind of talking through their history, because the way that I've kind of broken down between the Buried and Me, I think, I kind of break their records down in threes, and I don't call them trilogies because I don't think they were created with that intent. But I think in terms of sound and maybe in terms of ethos, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first three records kind of rounded out with Alaska had a very consistent sound, just kind of a more polished version of that sound. I think Colors, the original Colors, Great Misdirect, and the Parallax Cycle, kind of to me definitely has a certain sound. And then really the last three, Comaclyptic, Automata, which I consider one work because it is one work, and Colors 2, I think really kind of have their own influence and their own production ethos and songwriting ethos that they're really following. So it's been interesting to kind of see the progression. With that said, and it kind of is something you touched on a minute ago, I think really in terms of Alaska, like a lot of that early stuff I think really is interesting in the overarching metal scene, even removed from prog. Like they were doing a lot of really cool things, especially in the time frame that a lot of that stuff was released, kind of that early to mid 2000s, right?
Yeah.
But what always was an obstacle for me, and again might be controversial opinion, but I bought Alaska the day it came out. I bought Colors the day it came out, and both those records are very important for me and very important for me in my kind of formative musical years. But they're so damn hard to listen to a lot of the times, and I think it lends itself to
difficult to listen to. How?
Production wise.
Okay.
The production, I think musically to me those early records, they're just bristling with ideas, right? They're just filled to the brim with ideas and good ideas, and a young band being very adventurous and kind of pushing the boundaries of what they were trying to do in order to solidify and kind of formulate their own sound and make their own mark, which I think they ultimately did with Colors. I think that is a statement as much as any album is a statement. But to me, and it's funny now, the next point I'm getting at, to see where they've kind of progressed in terms of their production value, and then them over the last couple of years, they've had an entire kind of big push to go back and remix and remaster all those old records. To where now, a record like, Alaska, for as much as I love it, might have been a hard record for me to revisit on the whole. Obviously go back and listen to Selkies and some of those songs. Now it just, I think, reproduces that vision with much better fidelity. And I'm usually not a huge proponent of the whole remix remaster thing, but I think those records really benefit from it because now it's very easy to listen to all of those albums as kind of a body of work. They definitely hold up. The new mixes, in my opinion, hold up with kind of their current production standard.
I think that is probably one of the best things that they could do because it gives them the benefit of still having that lightning in a bottle type feel that they had. I mean, they were really on fire. I mean, they've been on fire their entire career, but those first few albums, from Alaska through Parallax, are really, lightning in a bottle type situations. You had the right group of musicians with the right producers, and in terms of the creative output, it was awesome. I do think that Jamie King, I mean, he seems like a really cool guy. I think he's a really good producer, and he knows what that band is going for and knows how to get that out of them. I'm Same thing. I've never been a huge fan of his mixing or engineering. That's why I think it's great that the band is able to put their ego aside, and I'm sure probably their friendship with Jamie, and there's a mutual understanding. Like, yeah, Jamie's the right person to produce this band, absolutely. But if Jens Bogren is making himself available to mix for you, like, take it.
Yeah, and so I mean that's what kind of gets to my next point, I guess, and we can actually even right now talk a little bit about the production of Colors too, because it kind of factors into the next point I wanted to make. So, obviously, the whole idea behind a Colors record is that it's one piece of music, but this piece of music happens to be broken up into 12 movements or 12 pieces, songs within a song, as it were, for a total length of 78 minutes and 40 seconds.
Jesus.
That's like that's like one of our track lists.
Except good.
Except good. Personnel, so same band as you said, that's been the band for about, 17 years now? Probably plus, right? Mm-hmm. At least 17 years recording. You got Tommy Rogers, vocals and keyboards, Paul Wagner, lead guitar, Dusty Waring on rhythm guitar, Dan Briggs playing bass and keyboards on this record, and the man, Blake Richardson, on drums. And he does harsh vocals on Revolution and Limbo, which I didn't know until reading the liner notes here recently. I've listened to the record about 5 times now, so did not know that. Then on Fix the Air, there's a few guest drum solos. We got Mike Portnoy of Winery Dogs, the first drum solo.
How does that feel saying that?
I love Mike, you know that. Naveen Copperweiss of Entheos did the second drum solo on Fix the Air. Ken Schalk, ex Candiria, did the third drum solo on Fix the Air. Production, Jamie King, as always, doing the production engineering. Jens, our boy, doing the mix. But also there's a few other musicians kind of listed, or not musicians, sorry, producers listed here, or engineers. We have Ricardo Borges in mixing, Tony Lindgren in mastering, Corey Myers photography, layout, design, Jason Prushko engineering, Thomas Koos engineering, and Aaron Strelecki photography. I will say this record sounds like $1 million goddamn bucks.
It does.
I think that Jens and we've been really, I think for years now, kind of, that's been our like gold standard is Jens. And obviously the metal realm, has done tons of records that sound great. The one that I always kind of point to is some of those kind of mid-period Amon Amarth records just sound incredible. Searcher Rising, I think what he did with Odin on Our Side, Twilight of the Thunder God, great sounding metal records.
Even the lesser known or maybe the lesser appreciated ones, like I know he did one of the James LaBrie solo records, and I thought that one sounded awesome.
Yeah, just a phenomenal ear, and I think it was really cool to me to see like right around this period, probably mid 20 teens, when Jens started working with a lot of progressive metal bands. Then it really started kind of pushing it past the edge there, because it was like, okay, cool, yeah, obviously he's a great metal engineer and producer and mixer and whatever, we know that, but just hearing the way that he approached a lot of those elements that are so integral to a good progressive metal record, drums, toms. I always think of his drum sounds as just being like next level, especially working with a drummer as amazing as Blake is.
Yeah,
just every little nuance pops out and just really kind of has that weight and that pop that it really needs. So that's great. So yeah, record sounds awesome, and I think that to me is, in terms of BTBAM, one of the best things they ever did. I
Mm-hmm.
think that team of having Jamie King produce and engineer the records, and then having Jens do the mix. Really, I mean, you can hear like certain pickup around Coma Ecliptic, like all of a sudden something that was missing is now there,
Yeah.
and really has been there ever since,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of some stylistic changes they've made. Obviously, we said, Coma Ecliptic, a little bit more scaled back, a little bit more rocky BT BAM set, which to me, Coma Ecliptic, probably of the newer records, is my favorite, I would say. Love that record to death, spent a ton of time with it. But then, even like Automata, they veer a little bit more into that kind of eccentric prog metal where they're doing a lot of that genre mashing that they're known for. Still sounds clear as a bell. Great mix,
Mm-hmm.
great low end where it's needed, but really nice separation while still kind of having that heft. And same on Colors 2, which I think Colors 2 generally is a little bit more them kind of orienting themselves back into that kind of metal with abandoned sound, but in the 2021 sense of BT Band.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a quote from Tommy, and I'm going to paraphrase it here because I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something to the effect of they went into the recording of the original Colors album knowing that they had to go make an impression and make a statement, and that's what they wanted to do with this album. So I definitely think it comes through in the performance and the recording and the songwriting and just the spirit of everything. I will say, and well, I'll ask you first. So when you saw that they were going to be releasing a new album and the album was going to be called Colors 2, what was your initial reaction? And then what was your reaction once you started listening to the album?
Yeah, so my initial reaction was, if they're going to call it this, they seem like a real smart group of guys, and they're all great musicians. If they're going to call it this, they know that they have something special on their hands, because much like that would be like Dream Theater saying, "Hey, this next one's Scenes from Memory Part 3."
Mm-hmm.
I think in the annals of prog metal or prog rock or progressive music just as a whole, Colors has kind of now ascended to that status of a Scenes from a Memory or a Operation Mindcrime. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a classic in the genre. It's a stone cold classic. So any band, I'm always a little leery whenever it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do Colors 2, or we're gonna do a sequel to this classic thing, because I think the initial cynical thought is, oh, this is a cash grab,
Mm-hmm.
or they're trying to ride the wave of nostalgia for whatever that classic piece of art that they released was. So I kind of went into it hoping for the best, but a little hesitant. Then when I started listening to the record, I was pleasantly kind of surprised that it was as I was surprised that it was as fluid and as put together as the record ultimately is.
Sure.
That being said, as a sequel to Colors 1, there's things I think it does really well and excels at. There's things I think it doesn't do that the first Colors did.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, it's hard for me to judge it necessarily on those merits completely. I'm still trying to judge it as its own entity as well. So,
Yeah.
how about you?
So I'll preface this by saying I love BTBAM. I don't think there's a record out there, except maybe The Great Misdirect, that I've ever have disliked. And I mean, who knows? Maybe if I went back and listened to Great Misdirect now, I'd love it. But on the whole, same thing. They're one of those bands that has consistently inspired me, and I always love it when they put out music. That being said, I'm always reluctant to listen to their new albums whenever they come out. And and the reason for that is, we get to talking about the style that they continue to excel at, and their sound. And I know every time they release a record, it's going to take at least 3 or 4 hours for me to start to have an idea of what's going on in the songs, and to really sit down and figure out what it's about, find those recurring melodies and everything. And I don't know if it's as a result of me getting older and my brain getting more stupider, but like I knew when this came out, okay, this album's gonna kick ass. but I'm not going to listen to it until I know I have, you know, at least a week to be able to listen to it
Digest
on
it.
repeat. And I mean, truth be told, it came out what, August 21st last year. It's February 23rd at the time of recording this. This is the first time I listened to this album. Was this
Mm-hmm.
last week? I hadn't even
Yeah.
started to, just because I knew it was going to be such an undertaking
Oh,
uh,
definitely.
getting into it. Uh, but that being said, when I finally did listen to the album, I was I was a little concerned at first because like the first two, maybe two and a half songs are almost to me feel like a beat for beat remake of Colors. And I went to it thinking like, oh no, like is this what they're doing? Are they going to completely copy? And of course they didn't. And that's just, references, or at least I think it's references, I don't know, to the first album,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of the pacing with that. Um, but yeah, as it went along, like it was cool, but same type of thing. Uh, loved it when I was in the moment, and then once the track got done, I tried to go back and think, okay, what's a memorable section of that? Not a memorable, but what's a section of that I really enjoyed? And I was kind of like, what?
So, in terms of how we digest BTBAM, right? So, BTBAM to me was always one of those bands where the sense of vision and I guess the sense of, you know, storytelling or the desire to kind of create an atmosphere or create some sort of uh, world, I guess, that you're inhabiting for that hour and 20 minutes or whatever, always was really like the big draw. But I think there's a flip side, right? So us being fans of prog and progressive music and kind of that long form music, right, and storytelling aspect, like I love that, right? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
pig in shit whenever I'm listening to something like that. But it's interesting you say what you say because I think as we have gotten older, the way that you can engage with that type of music is a little bit different. I thoroughly enjoyed Colors too, but I don't think of it in terms of songs. I couldn't name one song off of Colors too.
Same.
I same thing. I think when I put it on as a piece, and that's also limited my ability to engage with it a little bit because I'm not just spinning fix the error,
Mm-hmm.
on my car ride to and from work every day. If I put it on, I'm putting it on, and
Sure.
I'm going to ride out that whole 78 minutes. And I feel like some of the earlier records, it was easier for me, and that could be this nostalgia talking, but it was easier for me to pick out those individual points. And I think probably Alaska was the last record from BT BAM where you could really segment the record in those kind of digestible bite-sized pieces.
Interesting.
You could do that to an extent, or I could do that to an extent with Colors, but even Colors for me, just personally, I started to kind of have a hard time just putting a song on. I tended to like engage with it as a record, and I feel more so about that probably from Parallax onwards. There's certainly like songs of Coma Ecliptic I can put on, but whenever I've spun Automata or Colors 2, in the last 5 years or whatever, plus it's always been as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to try to listen to their records in one go, but obviously if you don't have 70 minutes where you're doing anything, case in point, the second time I listened to Colors 2 was on a plane ride back from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Because I was a captive audience and I just put my headphones in and I went along for the ride. I think the other time was the night it came out. I
Yeah.
listened on streaming and then, subsequently I've listened to it a few more times, but it's always in one go. So I think that's almost kind of a little bit different sort of ethos in how they present the piece or the song. And I know they kind of really hit on that with Colors 1, where, hey, this is an hour of unbroken music, or it's supposed to be an hour of unbroken music, one piece broken up into these different kind of sub movements. And I feel like they've kind of been on that ever since,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse. And I feel that they kind of approach it the same way with Colors too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think it's anything that the band is doing differently, because I think if you could keep one thing as a constant, and I don't mean this in like a derogatory ACDC type way, but if there's one thing that you could keep as a constant in this whole situation, it's probably the band's sound, right? They have sounded the same and are unapologetically so and have been for the last, almost 2 decades now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, it's I personally chalk it up to me getting older. Maybe it's me having a crippling social media addiction versus where I was in 2005, where, it was Headbangers Ball on Saturday night, and that's how I got my new music. And I was eager to do that because I couldn't download any songs because I had 56K on a gateway machine at my house. I, for one, am still glad that they have been able to find success with a lot of different, for at least this type of music, high end record labels that are willing to pick up what they have and put them out. I mean, they've been with Victory, or they were with Victory initially. They've been with Metal Blade. They've
Mm.
been with Sumerian. They've been with a lot of, kind of the cream of the crop labels for this type of music. And I've managed to, whenever one drops off, or when they end their contract with one, another's eager to pick it up. So
No, absolutely, yeah, yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing too. It's like it to me. I feel like they're kind of setting themselves or charting that course, and have been for a while. To where between the next 5 to 10 years, what are they going to be doing? Are they still
mhm.
going to be playing this kind of really heavy, dense style? Or are they going to kind of mellow out a little bit? I thought it was funny because on Coma, when that record came out, I thought that was kind of the moment. I thought like, okay, to me that record has a lot more to do with progressive rock than it does even necessarily progressive metal. Not to say that there aren't parts that are heavy, but
Mhm.
that was the first record to me where there was really that emphasis on breathing room and a lot of kind of just spacing out, you know what I mean, and
Yep.
a less of a focus on that density, especially coming off of Parallax, which is a phenomenal record. And I think Parallax the record is great. I love the EP
Oh,
even
same.
more than the record. Honestly, I love those three songs. I think it's just phenomenal. Um, but when Coma came out, I really thought that was going to be the moment. And then it was interesting when Automata came out, and the first few singles they released were like really heavy off Automata Part
Hmm.
One, and then Automata Part Two. I think it was the first track on that. I don't want to get the name wrong. I think it might have been Proverbial Bellow, but just really like full blown, like I would say peak DT prog metal. Just
Hmm.
great, lots of dynamics, really tight instrumentation, really great production. So it's interesting to see. Then they kind of with Colors 2 leaned again a little bit more into the metal side of things. And I think what makes it a Colors record to me, and I don't know if this was at the onset was designed as a Colors record, or if they decided to call it Colors 2
Hmm.
after the fact, but it definitely, I think, harkens back to a lot of that kind of whimsy and devil may care sort of attitude that they had early in their career, but through the filter of that maturation and sense of kind of confidence that they developed with some of their later material.
Yeah, and I also think it's cool to take note of the development of each of the members of the band. Like, I know you could pick out any one of them, and like see their growth as musician, which they started in that group already at a very high level. But I mean, Blake has been a monster, and slowly as the band has progressed, he's incorporated, I think, different genres into his drumming. Um, Paul's always been a freak. Obviously, Dusty, I feel like, is kind of the underappreciated one in that group, but there's a lot of really cool lead stuff that he does. He's got a mean right hand. Dan Briggs has obviously, picked up keyboard over the last few years and incorporated more of that on top of being a top class bassist. But I mean, for me, I think that Tommy's vocals are what has progressed the most, especially from like their first album to now. He still has that edge to his growling vocals, but his clean singing has come a long way, especially since the original Colors album. And I feel like now is more at home. And he's never been a bad singer by any means, but I think we know that when we listen to BTBAM, we're going to be listening for growls and vocals primarily. We're not going to be listening for Stu Block type clean,
Yeah, Devin Townsend.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean that's been okay. Like, not everything has to be that. And I mean, for that matter, he's still not doing, that type of stuff, but he's definitely expanded his palette, so to speak. and he has a much broader comfort zone in terms of those clean vocals, which I think is really cool to see.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, so let me ask you this then. In terms of Colors too, we kind of talked a lot about the history of BTBAM, kind of where they're at as major players in the genre, et cetera, et cetera. So now I guess I would posit to you, what were some highlights of yours on the record, if you can point to any specific sections or songs or things that really stood out to you as being cool, and then also some cons, you would say, the record, or some maybe things that detracted from it being a perfect album.
So I'll start with the negatives first so that we can end on positives. The negatives, if I could think of two things, honestly, and probably the only two things, but they're big things. The length, which I never thought I'd be saying, but I felt like this album was a little on the long side. Obviously, filling a CD to capacity. Um, but I think there's some things there, and there's a couple places I heard in some of the longer songs. Like I think Never Seen Future Shock. There's a couple portions of that song where you probably could have cut out half of any given section, and the song wouldn't have been any weaker for it. So it's a little long. And then I think the other thing, which we've already touched on ad nauseum, is the density of the album. But it's hard for me really to even say that that's a negative, because that's part of BTBAM's sound, and that's what makes them unique. And just in terms of my willingness to engage with it, and this is me personally, it has nothing to do with the talent or the writing on the album. I'm more reluctant to engage with it because I know it's going to take me longer to digest the songs.
Yeah.
Which some people would automatically, qualify that as a negative. Like, oh, if you don't like it the first listen, then it's not a great song. Like, no, fucking grow up. Not all music works that way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the highlights, the Double Helix of Extinction, I really enjoyed. What is the one? Oh my god. See, I'm already losing it. Fix the Error, for being kind of a gimmick track. I really enjoyed that one. Turbulence, I believe. There was one that had like a lot of synthesizers that I thought was different, and it was towards the end of the album. I think it's Turbulent, but it may be The Future is Behind Us. But I thought that was good, and then I also thought that Human as Hell was solid.
Yeah. Cool.
What about you? What were your lowlights and highlights?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo, I think, a lot of the same things that you echo, and that is just, for as much as I love and 10 years ago would have completely said, 80-minute record, oh cool, well, why can't it be longer than 80 minutes? I think I've understood or come to understand now that it's not even so much a quality thing, because I think the quality of the music is there. But as you said, I think it becomes then our ability as busy adult humans, right, in 2022, our ability to engage with the music in the way that we want to. So I've certainly, just as much as, I love a 100-hour video game, I love engaging with an 8-hour game that I can play in a weekend and beat, Same kind of with music. I love an 80-minute long prog record when I can find the time to engage with it. When I'm on a flight, or I'm driving back and forth on my hour-plus commute every day, that's great. But typically if I'm vacuuming the house or I'm doing something like that, it's hard to put this on, because I want to be engrossed and I want to be engaged in it. I don't want to constantly be stopping and starting. And I think that's why this doesn't really lend itself well to those types of environments. This is very much a sit down, and it's an event. It's a listen where you really want to be engaged. You want to be fully invested in it, and that's great. But it can be a pro and a con.
Yeah, well, I think too that in the long run, it's a con in the moment, but I think in the long run it's going to be a pro. And people might say, oh well, why do you not have a problem sinking 100 hours into a video game, but the hour-long album is more difficult to grasp. And I think that from that aspect, something like a video game or even movies, you can break those down into nice little bite-sized chunks. If I'm playing the New Horizon game, as I am, you can do a mission and you can spend, if you want, 15-20 minutes a day on that, and you can milk that video game out for the next 6 months and take it at your own pace. And for the most part, because it's so visual and it's interactive, you're going to be more engaged with the story. This, you are sitting down and you're listening to what they have to say to you, and it's your job as the listener to engage with it and try to figure out what those connections are and put them together yourself, which, as our collective attention span gets shorter, I think something like this is kind of a good check every now and then to kind of snap us back to reality and be like, oh, that's right, life doesn't operate in 15 to 20-minute chunks. And
Yeah, no.
some things require our undivided attention for a while.
Yeah, did kind of dedication in order to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that. I think, it's a phenomenal record. I really truly did enjoy it. And I think a lot of that, and I guess this would be a pro, or a highlight, a lot of that kind of has to do with BTBAM's ability now to just kind of breathe a little bit more. And I really, for me now, the highlights of the records are more kind of the parts where they kind of chill out a little bit and they take the foot off the gas. Like, that's why, to me, I really enjoyed the last, maybe quarter of the record. So kind of what you highlighted, I guess it would be, let's see here, from Future is Behind Us through Human as Hell. Future is Behind Us into Turbulent is almost kind of like one 10-minute long song. That's the real synth-heavy part that you're kind of referring to.
Okay.
And it's cool because it's a really cool rhythmic thing, kind of rhythmic motif that keeps popping back up. But at the same time, too, there's a lot of space. And I feel like when they're given more space because they're so used to dealing in that density of a lot of their compositions, when they're given that space, all those musicians kind of collectively and also individually shine, because that's when you really hear some cool keyboard arpeggiation things going on, or padding things going on, or Blake does some really cool tasty cymbal accents or whatever. It's like what was the song? I think it was like Famine Wolf and stuff like that on just like really cool kind of parts where, okay, it's very sparse as opposed to being dense. So then they kind of think and approach the part a little bit differently. So that's what I really appreciate on this record. Now, I guess the big question that I would pose is, do you think, knowing everything we talked about colors and about kind of the history of that record in the genre, where it stands in the genre as a classic, does this hold up to that?
I think so. You can't recreate the birth of a genre of music. No matter how hard you try to, capture that moment, that lightning in a bottle, to go back to that phrase, you're never going to be able to make it sound as fresh as it was the first time. But you can take that and push it to its next logical step, which I feel like has been done quite a bit. Meatloaf had Bad Out of Hell, and as much shit as it gets, I honestly think that Bad Out to Hell was a much better album, because he took all the things that made that album great, and expanded upon them. Metallica took all the things that worked with Master of Puppets and dialed them up to 11, everything up to 11 except for the bass guitar, of course, for And Justice for All. And I feel like all the things that worked with Colors work with Colors too. It, to me, isn't as special because I've heard a lot of those sounds before, but that's not necessarily a negative. Like, you can't make people forget that sound just to reintroduce it. So they're doing a lot of the similar type things, but they're not doing it in a disingenuous way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, to me, I would say it holds up to Colors, one, because I have to respect the fact that they didn't try to recreate it line by line. It wasn't a retread. It definitely is its own album. It has its own vibe. They do a lot of cool things in terms of like structure, like you said, where you're listening to it and you're like, oh, this seems familiar, but they're doing some similar structural things. They're playing around with themes, and they're doing them in a different key, or the melody is shifted just a little bit to where there's callbacks, certainly, especially like Human as Hell is a major callback, but it's done in a way where I think it's really effective because it stands on its own.
Yeah.
So to me, I think in trying to maintain that vibe, I think they hit it. I'd be really curious to see where they go from here. because I think this was a, obviously released at a weird time just in history, world history, but I think it's a really strong record, and it definitely is just kind of another notch in their belt, their current era, where to me, I mean, they're really can't do any wrong. I think if they maintain this path, I think they definitely have a lot more strong records in them. I'd be curious to see what direction they go in.
Sure. So I'm going to assume off everything based on everything we've just discussed, that you would recommend the album.
Yes, take a day off work, take some PTO, listen to it. But I do recommend it. I think it's definitely quite a piece of work.
Awesome. I would also recommend it. Same type of thing. If you are of the mindset to enhance your listening experience, I'd recommend doing that. Usually goes really well with the BTBAM album, if that's your thing. But yeah, I would recommend it. I think there's a lot to dig into there that can keep you busy for hours on end. There's a lot from a musician standpoint that you can learn and pull from that album. So yeah, I'd recommend it.
So thanks for joining us on our discussion of BTBAM's 2021 record, Colors 2. We will be back next time. Thanks.